Hey everyone, thanks for jumping in and clicking the video and watching today. My name is Travis, for those of you who may not know me. And this month, the month of May, we are talking about volunteers and how we can gain volunteers as church leaders, how we can retain more of those so that they don't quit, they don't burn out. And so last week we talked about really the foundational piece of this whole idea of trying to get volunteers within our church. And we said, I talked about how like the foundation is the most important, and the foundation starts with our vision, our culture, our values, our mission. And if you're not a church that is really living out the mission that Jesus gave us, which is go out and tell everybody about him and teach them everything about him, baptize people, make disciples. Like if you're not a church that's doing that, if you don't really have the right foundation, then you're going to have a harder time gaining volunteers and keeping volunteers. And so if you haven't watched that video, make sure to go back and watch that, because really none of the rest of this matters if you don't get the foundation right. And so we talked about foundation last week. And so today we want to start building on structure and talking about what this starts to practically look like. Really wanted to start kind of simple and then build upon it. And so today we're talking structure. So the first thing I want to ask you to do is you need to find a leader. Maybe that's going to be you if you're the pastor, but in my opinion, it would be better if it's probably better if it's somebody else, because you probably already have enough things on your plate that you're dealing with, that you're having to worry about. And so it would be great if you had a leader who sort of, at least at the start, at least at the beginning, and this role might change and might transition, but at least in the beginning, they're going to oversee like all the volunteers within the church. And so you have to find the right leader for that position. That was actually the position that really I got started in at my home church. And it ended up growing into new positions, and it ended up growing into a role at the church later on. But yeah, that's how I got my start, and this is kind of how I started it. But you need to find a leader, and when you're finding that leader, they need to have two qualities that I think are really important, or even if it's not within one person, you need these two qualities within maybe two people, and you're going to see why as I tell you what they are. So number one, you need somebody who is a galvanizer, and galvanizer is this new word, and that I've learned about recently. I would have just said you needed somebody who can motivate people. But kind of the fancier word these days is you need a galvanizer. And I don't know who came up with it, but anyways, it's a better word to say, like, you need someone who has the ability to communicate in a way that's going to motivate people into action, right? That's what a galvanizer is. They motivate people into action. They motivate people to do something. And so like, it's really great if you have, say, a volunteer coordinator, volunteer director, whatever you call that position, who has that skill, because it's going to be really, really important. And so as you think about like who might could do that, I want to give you a few tips on how you can identify a person with that skill. Number one is like they're the person who maybe they throw a get together at their house. They're having a cookout, they're having some sort of party, and everybody shows up, right? Because they're just really great at gathering people. They're really good about that. They may be the person who has either the biggest Sunday school class or the biggest small group, right? They never have any trouble getting people to come to things. It's that type of person. They are almost always, they're just a relationship builder. They're great at that. They build just really good relationships, and people want to be around them, and people want to be a part of what they're doing. And so that's the skills that a galvanizer has. If you have somebody in your church that, no one comes to their things, they have a hard time, getting anybody to come to their small group, whatever. Like that's the exact opposite of what you're looking for. Like you need someone who's able to motivate people into action. It is great if you have that person within your church and you can find that person. Sometimes that person ends up being us. It ends up being the lead pastor. It ends up being somebody who's already in leadership, and they have that skill. And so they are able to motivate people to action. And let me say this, it's a whole lot easier. And let me back up just for a second. Currently, and it's probably never been that easy, but currently it's certainly more difficult to gain and retain volunteers than it used to be. Over the past few years, it's just they have less time than ever before, and they are more productive of their time, and they don't have any sense of really guilt of saying letting somebody down or letting a church down or whatever. And so, if your motivation is we're going to guilt people into doing something, that's a really terrible strategy. It just doesn't work anymore. And so you got to make sure that foundation is there. Hey, we're a church that's doing great when it comes to mission, vision. We're living it out. We're seeing people's lives change. We're seeing disciples being made, people baptized. Then the job of the galvanizer is actually a lot easier because you already have the right culture set up at your church. If you don't have that, it's going to be really, really hard. It's going to be really, really hard. All right. So you need a galvanizer, whether that's you or whether that's somebody else. You need that person. I've not been great at that. I don't think that's one of my core strengths. But I was successful in the position because I had a really good culture around me in the church, and my pastor was good at this, better at this than I am. All right, and so it doesn't always have to be you, but you need a person who can motivate others to action. So that's one quality we're looking for. The second quality we're looking for is you need somebody with administrative skills, because we want to get organized, and it's going to take somebody with administrative skills to do that. Now, more often than not, your person who's a great galvanizer, who's great at drawing people in, they are not normally the best at organization. I don't know why that is. I don't get it. But it's just normally you don't have those two qualities in the same person. If you do, absolutely, like they would be a great candidate for somebody like a volunteer coordinator, volunteer director, whatever you want to call that position. Like, you need to go out and ask them to serve in that area if you have that type of person. Most of the time you have one or the other. And so you're either going to have to be the galvanizer yourself, and then you're going to have to put a person in that position who's an organizer, who's administrative, who can put all the pieces together on paper and see everything. Or maybe you as the pastor and as the leader, you're like, hey, really, I'm more administrative and I'm better at that type of stuff. I'm better at laying out plans and those things, rather than kind of being a cheerleader or whatever you want to call it. And so maybe you take the administrative position, and somebody else within your church, you said, hey, they're really better at rallying people than I am. And it takes some humility as sometimes as a pastor to be able to admit that. But there's nothing wrong with it. God's given us all different gifts, and it's up to us to use them wisely and to operate best within the gifts that He's given us. And so you need to get organized, right? Whether that's you doing it or whether that's somebody in that role doing it. So you want to find somebody who has administrative skills and can put things together. Because here's what you're going to need to figure out. All right, within our church, what ministries, programs, whatever you call them, do we really want to offer people? For most churches, they're going to fall into like 3 or 4 categories, really, or sort of the big ones, and then there's some others outside of that, maybe. But it would be like worship, music, singing, whatever you want to call it, and sort of the production piece that goes that goes along with that. And so it's the person who's working the audio, the sound, maybe the lights. If you have a screen that you use, and then it's like the person who's working that type of stuff. That's kind of one big area normally most churches have. The other one is kids ministry. And so if you have a separate nursery, toddler room, children's church, whether if it goes on during normal church time, whatever it is, you're normally going to have that ministry in most churches. And then probably your guest services, first impressions, again, whatever you call them. And so those are your people who may be greeting at the door. Some churches have people in the parking lots serving. Some people have maybe people serving coffee in their church, and so they have people working those areas. Maybe they have a welcome area. They have people who are just greeting people, and so guest services and first impressions. All right, so those are kind of like the 4, I think, major ministries that most churches have some variation of. And then there's some other stuff off of that that's really important as well. So, but we're kind of focusing on Sunday morning ministries is what I'm thinking about right now. So you need to identify, all right, what are those things that we want to for sure offer? And then secondly, as a part of that, is like, how many people do we need to create a good experience for those coming? How many people do we need in those areas? How many door greeters do we need? Do we have multiple doors, multiple entrances that people come in, or do we just have the front door and that's all anybody ever comes in and out of? Then maybe we need only one or two door greeters. In kids ministry, how many volunteers do we need? Do we need 2 volunteers every Sunday? My general feeling is that you almost always, from a safety concern, you have to always have 2 adults in any kid's room because of liability, because of other things that come along with that. Just to protect yourself, like you need to have 2 adults in every kid's room. And we can talk more about that. If you have questions about that, message me and I'll let you know why, and we can share more details about that. But how many people do you need in each of these areas? And how often do you want them to serve? And so you said, well, maybe we only want our people serving kids ministry. Maybe we only want them to serve once a month. Okay, well, and we need 2 to serve together. And so if they 2 to serve together and it's once per month, maybe it's, all right, we need 8 volunteers. And that's what I'm talking about with getting organized and figuring things out. All right, we need 8 volunteers for kids ministry. We need, maybe we just need 4 greeters because we're going to have 2 greeters per week, but they're going to serve every other week. Maybe the same people on the worship team, they're going to be serving every week. And so we just need 4 or 5 of them, whatever it might be. And then maybe you need to fill in from here and there. Same deal with the production team. Maybe they serve every week. Maybe they serve every other week. And so what does that look like? And so you need somebody who can get organized, who's administrative, who can jot this all down, work with you, or if you're that person, jot it all down on paper. All right, here are the ministries that we want to offer. Here's how many volunteers it would take to do it well. Here's how often we would like for those volunteers to be serving. And so here's how many total volunteers we actually need. Most of the time, churches, a lot of times, they actually don't know what they need. And so they're asking for volunteers. They actually don't really even understand themselves, like how many they really need. And so get organized. Make sure you know your numbers. Make sure we do that. And then compare that to what you currently have. Because you can't really know what you need until you know what you currently have. And so you say, all right, we just talked about, we need 8 volunteers in kids ministry. Currently, there's 2 people. They're serving basically every week or every other week, but only one of them's in there, and we really need to get 2 people in there. And so we don't need them serving as often because when they're serving, they're actually missing the main part of the service, and we don't want them missing service. And so we need to recruit. All right, we got 2, we need 8. We need to be able to recruit 6 more kids ministry volunteers. All right, that's what I'm talking about with like actually knowing your numbers and actually knowing what you need. And so getting this jotted down on paper, computer, whatever it might be, that's going to help you to figure out exactly what you need. And then once you know that, all right, you have the person in place, you have the either volunteer coordinator, volunteer director, maybe you're going to take on part of that role and you're going to have somebody else take on part of that role. I really recommend, if you're the lead pastor, that you don't take on this role yourself. Really recommend that you have somebody else do it because it can turn into a big job. But you know who that person is, and then you work with them to get organized on exactly what you need. And what you need in the moment may be like, this may expand, and we may add ministries later, or we may add volunteers later. But right now, like, this is really what we would like to see. And then that gives that leader, that volunteer leader, an idea of like what they need to go out and recruit, what they need to go out and be trying to accomplish. Okay, and so that's what we need. So that we're starting to build a structure on that. Next week, we're going to talk about how do you go about. We have the leader in place. We got our foundation in place. Now, how do we actually go about recruiting these volunteers? What are some of the best methods to do that with? And so we're going to talk about that next week in next week's video. So thanks so much for tuning in today. And I'll see you next week.